Hey everybody, what's going on? Welcome to Deep Dive, where we take a closer look at our Sunday series. It's Dylan here. This is episode 3. I'm here with Pastor Jim, as always. And
just jamming to the music.
Oh yeah, nice. In your head. Before we go any further, make sure you
There's
like.
a lot happening in my head.
Yes. Like, comment, subscribe. If you hear something today that if you learn something or if something sticks out to you, comment below. Let us know. We'd love to interact with you and hear more. And make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell so that you can stay up to date on everything coming out as we go. So this is week 3 and episode 3 of our series, NSFW, Not Safe for Work.
Yep.
And so we talked about relationship reality week 1. Week 2 was he married a prostitute. And then week 3, we have more than a feeling.
More than a feeling.
I don't know if you remember, I talked about that. That was actually, I think the first time I preached here, I did it about worship, my name, mine, more than a feeling.
I forgot. I do remember that now that you say that.
But, I mean, I'm not upset.
Yeah, well,
I just thought about that the other day. I hadn't thought about it in a while, and I was like, oh, yeah. It's more than a feeling.
Yeah, it actually, I actually took, I think I spent 30 minutes and got lost in 80s rock ballads because of that. So as soon as I came up with the name, I was like, boop, 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 boop. And then I was, all over the place. Some REO Speedwagon. Oh. REO Speedwagon, man, they have a special place in my heart. And
not for me, but I get it.
Yeah.
There's man, you can really go down. So we do things like that at the apartment. We'll go down like a YouTube rabbit hole where we just go back and it's like, do you remember this song? And it'll be like, what is it? Cold by Crossfade. Or just some random, you'd be like, you remember this Nickelback song?
Oh, Nickelback.
That everybody was into, and we'll start there and just hit every related. And I mean, for an hour somehow.
Help me understand this.
Watch the weirdest thing.
How do we as a culture consistently hate the things that we love?
I don't know, man.
Because, I mean, Nickelback was like everybody's jam. Everywhere you turn, people were listening to Nickelback. And then all of a sudden, it was like, I hate Nickelback.
Yeah, I don't know when that happened. Because I have said that. People want to act like they're the worst thing in the world. But I remember liking them. And I'm okay with that. I remember that's like people who crap on Creed. People loved Creed.
Oh, they did.
I loved Creed. There's a reason we know the songs, and it's not ironically. Like, we liked Creed. We liked Nickelback. I remember the record that everybody makes fun of now it was huge when it came out. Like, I had it. I listened to it.
By Nickelback?
Yeah. It was, All the Wrong Reasons, I think is what it was called. And it had a rock star on it, photograph.
Look at this photograph.
And then
every time I do, it makes me laugh.
I forget what the song is called, but there's like a ballad kind of thing that wasn't photographed on there. There's a bunch of stuff that it was on the charts and had a bunch of hits on it, and people just act like that didn't happen and like they weren't into it.
Yeah, they're like,
and I mean,
yuck. Who would listen to that?
I don't know. It's
What you got, Quinn?
My mic's not turning on, so check. I'm on. Check. Okay.
1, 2.
Dylan and I were kind of talking about it yesterday. It seems like there were just a lot of bands around that time that all had the same exact sound.
Yeah.
So like Nickelback and Hinder and like Theory of a Dead Man all kind of played to the same audience, but really like all kind of sounded exactly the same.
But what's different about then than now? It's the same thing. I go to the trending page on YouTube and 5 of the artists releasing songs on there, their music all sounds the same. I can't even understand what they're saying on a bunch of it.
Well, then I think rock was still
it's something thing. It is something different now because there were so many, and there's only like so many sounds I guess you can get out of an electric guitar. But there are a lot of bands that were in a very similar genre.
Fuel.
Or, I mean,
that was one. I mean, I'm just saying, like,
I can think of, like, there's so many, but it is weird too. I mean, we were talking, like you said, yesterday, and it was about even like the death of the rock star. So obviously, like, rock stars still exist, but like rock music doesn't really even. So like Maroon 5 started as a rock band, and they're not that anymore. Similarly, like if you go to like Songs About Jane, even then it's not like super rock, but like they were a band, and now they're more like a pop group. Maroon 5.
Yeah.
And we were talking about Maroon 5 yesterday, but
yeah,
so
Payphone.
now there's so many.
Trying to call.
It's weird, just like rock stars aren't really
What
a
they
thing anymore, or at least so now it's sort of like the rapper has become the new rock star.
Which, I mean, I don't have any problem with that.
Oh no,
I'm
it's just that transition is weird, and maybe that's some of what contributes to.
I will tell you,
why we hate on it now.
I was not very picky with my rock and roll per se. I'm a lot pickier with my rap.
I think a lot of it has to do too with their audience. Like that style kind of disappeared too. Like the Buckle Bro with all the Affliction and Ed Hardy and all that stuff. Like that was their audience. And whenever everybody started wearing skinny jeans, including like.
So you say that, but the mall here still has a buckle in it. Every time I walk by there, I think, how do they stay in business?
Well, and that's the thing. I mean, like Nickelback even still makes music, but
do they
they're
really?
just not in the forefront. Yeah, I listened to. They have a song called "Feed the Machine," and like it's heavy, which is weird. But then they also have one. I forget what it is, but it's almost like a Maroon 5 song. Like it's like funky and poppy. It's really strange.
See, I was always
like I guess you'd say the variety of
my bands were
their sound.
I mean, I liked rock. Don't get me wrong, but I think kind of predecessors to those guys, Stone Temple Pilots, Pearl Jam, some of those guys.
Just like the grunge era.
Yeah, a little bit of the grunge rock, but that wasn't ever like really my sweet spot. My sweet spot has always been punk, and still is, and I just love just good driving punk. It probably doesn't surprise you, does it? Green Day back in the day, man.
The energy being, they just released a new album. For those of you who are into that, they got a lot of flack for their Billboard, which it wasn't. They didn't like make the Billboard, but it was an advertisement for it, and it was basically it just came at like rap and pop music, a lot of that, and it's like no features, no Swedish songwriters. Basically all the things and it's like pure uncut rock and roll, and but a bunch of people on Twitter, like even like people who are who said that they were fans were like, man, this is in bad taste. Like this is like a elitist mindset. Like you need to get over yourself.
That sounds about right for them though.
And it's like, well,
over the years, I mean, they've had. That's not the first time that they've shown up.
I mean, do you think that punk rock is going to look at, or like just someone who's playing music like that is going to look at other kinds of music and not think that it's stupupid?
I mean, Billy Joe has.
But even then, I mean,
he's always shown up and acted like a punk.
Well, I mean, that's been their thing. We were talking about Billie Eilish earlier, for instance, and I mean, there's an interview where Billie Joe and Billie Eilish met up.
Oh yeah,
and they talk about songwriting and they talk about being an artist and they just things like that, because I mean, and Billie Joe's had a whole thing, but it's more now for them is it's the brand and it's the product. I mean, because now he's on the other side of rehab and he's got kids and his son plays music, and he's even he had an acting role in a movie.
See, I don't keep up with him. I'm not gonna lie. Like when they went into kind of some of their anti-God phase, like not just like, hey, we're not Christians, but they're kind of like they kind of hit this perpetual cycle of like anti-God, anti-Bible. That stuff just turns me off. I don't expect everybody to be a believer, but it really I even talked about it in this message that like those people that kind of show up and mock Christians and come at that, I just don't have time for it. And that happened in the early 2000s with those guys, and right around Boulevard of Broken Dreams, they kind of took that phase of it, and it lost its that was the last album I listened to was the one with Boulevard of Broken Dreams, which was a great album. I mean, I'm not gonna lie, there's good songs.
It's still one of my favorites.
It had good songs on it, and I'll ride down the road sometimes and I'll be like, kind of in a reminiscent thought pattern, and I'll pull up and throw on one of those old songs, and Google does a good job at with their algorithms. They'll pull up the next song will be one. I'm like, oh yeah, I remember this one too. Oh, I remember that. I remember that band. But at some point, I honestly, and I don't expect this for everybody, but I honestly just kind of get a heaviness, and I'm like, man, there's a reason I don't just feed on this all the time, because a lot of it ends up being kind of negative, Like if you think about Boulevard of Broken Dreams, I walk a lonely road, the only one that I have ever known. And even the lyrics of that, let me put it in perspective. Like listening to my kids listen to that song. You know what I'm saying? It's like, oh, I don't want you to feel that way. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't know that I even like you, like, listening to that, which is that balance of like, hey, I'm the dad and you're going to do what I say. And that balance of like, how can I steer you in a different direction? Because I don't want you to like speaking that over your life, thinking like that. I'm not saying that they do, but those are the emotions that come up. And it's like, there's a reason I just...
So I might get fired for this.
Good.
But
you produced the album.
Yeah. So I actually don't listen to music at all, period, anymore for that particular reason. It's like with me and just the way that I operate, it's better for me. I kind of see music as like this little capsule of like 3 minutes of someone else's like emotions and feelings, and I've just developed the thing to where I'm just not interested in it anymore, and it's weird whenever I think about it. Like I should probably be tested to make sure that I'm not like a sociopath or something like that, but it's I mean that's kind of my stance on just music in general right now, at least.
Well, and that was what really led me into naming the sermon on Sunday, More Than a Feeling, was that, like it fit because music in a unique way, not in an exclusive way, because I think stories in general, whether it's from music to movies, TV shows, books, elicit emotions. The concepts that we're talking about around relationships, whether that is within the, kind of the confines or boundaries of marriage or just between friends, like those things are a lot more complicated than than a simple emotion, that we can kind of communicate or convey in a story. And that's why like a romance novel can be just as unfair to creating an image of what a relationship should be like, just as much as like, watching porn could, or even listening to, certain songs. And there's also like some layers in there. And that is like knowing what the right things to say are, but acting them out aren't always the same. We can get more into that in a moment, but a lot of times we'll hear a musician, an artist, and they'll be singing the thing that you're like, I connect with that thought. But then especially today, especially in this world where everything's being filmed, there's an interview for everything. And you're like, hold on, you sang about this, but you're acting like this, those contradictions, they absolutely create confusion in people's hearts and minds, especially the younger you are. It's like, oh, I really like that song. It's really catchy. I connect with it. And then they go watch an interview and they're like, oh, but this person actually talks like this and acts like this. And you're giving influence, to certain people. And so I have a hard time with modeling that. It's like, I feel like, hey, if I'm going to say I listen to something, then that means I'm vouching for the fact that somebody else should be able to. And just like even with what Quinn was saying, I think that there are just seasons in our lives, maybe even where I think it's just healthy to turn some of that stuff off. Some of it can just be noise for a while, and then, and if you really are the artist and really looking for the music, there is so much great music. Even you were showing me some yesterday that doesn't even have words to it. I mean, you can get the sounds and the energy that you're wanting, and and you can steer clear of some of the dialogue that can be spoken over you. And when it comes to relationships, it's more than a feeling. It's more than something that can be summed up in a simple phrase. And I think in fairness, it's even something that is more complicated than what we're going to be able to even do justice for in this series. And there are some great series on relationships out there, but I think that the thing about being in good relationship and healthy relationships is it's something that you're always pursuing, always researching, always trying to dig in and find out how can I be a better person. Just like being a leader. You and I have talked a lot about like leadership. Like good leaders don't just go, I have reached the pinnacle of leadership and this is it. They're constantly trying to refine who they are in what they're doing. So, trying to navigate that. So, I wanted to in this series, I wanted to jump into some content that was maybe I don't want to say not as deep, but a little bit maybe a little bit less revelation and more practical steps. We've done. I think both are really helpful for us as believers. And so wanted to go to kind of like, well, what is the scripture saying that's just practical? We could walk away with some good elements. And so that was the lead in for this. Like, it's more than a feeling. It's something that we need to be practical about. And the love that I have for my wife is radically different than the love I had for her when we were dating and when we got married. And if those emotions and feelings were what I was kind of hinging forever on, till death do we part on, then, we wouldn't make it. But I will tell you that what we have today is something that I couldn't have even imagined then. Like, you couldn't have, who was it? You guys were talking about this comedian, Quinn, who just had his first baby.
Oh yeah, Dalia.
Are you talking about Sam Tripoli or Crystalia?
Crystalia.
Crystalia
just had one, and he was making the comment. He's like, I never understood this until I didn't see it.
I just love him. Like, I held him in my arms, and I feel like I've known him for like 15 years.
Yeah, it's like you won't understand this if you don't have kids. And he's like, I
can't believe I'm saying this.
Yeah. It's one of those truths. It's like, you won't understand. Like, I can't believe I'm having to say this right now, but all those people before me were right, and now I've got to move to the other side of the aisle. It's the same thing, like even like talking about the love I have for Carmen and the connection for intimacy, not physical intimacy, but just like emotional intimacy. It's the ability to step in and out of that is something that's pretty spectacular. And it's difficult to do that long term with friends because we don't tend to have that covenant, that push with our friends to say, no matter what, we're going to work this out. So I don't know about you, but I have definitely over the years, I feel like experienced hurt with people that I actually really care a lot about.
Yeah.
People that I still, I think almost every week now for months, I've walked through a relationship like that I just sit down with Carmen and we're both like I don't know what happened, and it's hard. There's just so much hurt when our relationship goes south,
Well, that's a lot of the story of really my relationship with really both of you guys. Kind of like we met, and Dylan and I lived together in a extremely difficult point in my life, and the same thing. I was serving at the church and involved at the time. And, so whenever we say that, it's relationship reconciliation is extremely possible. It's very possible. And so just before we move on, from it, I wanted to bring, that up is what happened to us. Like, I've had people in the past that just, kind of pawned me off to somebody else. If listeners don't know what I'm talking about, I've dealt with, addiction in the past, pretty severely. And I can say from experience that, a lot of people don't want to have anything to do with you, and it's justified a lot of times, but you can find yourself, in a point of reconciliation and like where we are today, all working with one another and doing life together.
I think that, we kind of come at it from this comedic point of view when we talk about, like, breaking up with a girlfriend or a boyfriend, and we all kind of know that feeling of what it's like to feel like not loved or insignificant in that moment, and the emotions that go with it. And we talk about that and we equip young people for that. We'll be engaged in that conversation. But I think there's almost like this mindset. It's like, well, I'm an adult. That doesn't happen anymore. And, once you're married and in a long-term relationship, that certainly should not be happening in that regards. But I don't know how we think that we escape those, or how we ever get to a point where we go, well, I'll never have another broken relationship. I agree. There's reconciliation that's available. It's sometimes it's really complicated though. I mean, like, sometimes you're at a complete loss, and you could go, oh man, there's nothing to it. Just pick up the phone and make it, blah, blah, blah. And, I can even think about some in myself where I actually did that. I had a relationship go south several years ago, and, I went through a lot of hurt in it, and, picked up the phone, a year later, making phone calls, trying for reconciliation, trying to grab coffee. And it just, I would say that there's probably not the tension that there was in that, through that relationship that, at one point, but there's definitely not the reconciliation that I would like, going from, talking to somebody pretty regularly to, saying hi once a year on Facebook or something.
Yeah, a lot of that stuff is so based around too how the other person perceives like what happened in the relationship and all that type of stuff. It's a lot of it. Like, I think about my mom all the time. It's, she has a underlying fear and worry and distress that haunts her 24/7 that I'm on heroin, and it's there's nothing that I can do to convince her, that I'm not, but, she was in the thick
tough.
of it, and it just, like my mentality on it and her mentality on it don't line up. And so it's something that I've had to learn how to, navigate at different times in my life. And it's hard a lot of times. So it's just, a lot of times it has to do with what happened and how people perceive and how the way that they're offended and that type of stuff.
And people also change. They change what it is that they believe or how they view something. That can also play a role in it. And you can't force somebody to see a perspective, see your perspective on everything. So yeah, it's tricky. So this actually is something for me, kind of birthing out of like, wanting to make sure that it's like I want to make sure that people understand that I get the fact that this is not simple all the time. And And so, like, I don't want people to think, well, Pastor Jim has it all figured out and he just doesn't get it. He doesn't relate, because I don't have it all figured out, and I do have my own relationship hurt. But I will say that I think that the good from that is it's a constant reminder of the relationship hurt I bring into my relationship with Christ because of my own personal unfaithfulness, my own personal shortcomings. And so, you know, we talked about that last week with Hosea, that that he gets a glimpse of, you know, how his wife is hurting him, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, this is the way I'm hurting God. And so the responses that he's feeling are the same ones that God's saying, hey, I feel all of that with you. So I do think there's good that comes from it. It's still very hard. So I went to Psalm 119, which is the longest, I guess, single chapter text that we have, the way we broke it down. So it's definitely the longest of the Psalms. And there's a, there's a real format to the way this is written. And, you know, it follows the Hebrew alphabet. Every 8 lines is a letter. And so there's a consistent theme that keeps coming through here, and that is, hey, I'm going through a difficult time, but your word is enough. Like, hey, this is a really difficult thing, but your word is enough. Hey, I'm not really sure where I stand on this thing, but your word is enough. It keeps coming back to God's word is sufficient, you know, and there is, you know, I wouldn't say that there's any contention, but there are some divided theories on who wrote this chapter. You know, some say that Ezra wrote it. Others say that David wrote it, and others say, I wrote that down, but I don't think I put it on these notes. Was it Daniel, I think, was the third one? But basically the idea is it's definitely somebody who's been through something. Like they're talking from a perspective of experience, not like, hey, I wonder what it's like to blah, blah, blah. You know, they're saying, hey, I've been through this, but your word has been sufficient. And so I began here in verse 112, and the writer says, I incline my heart to perform your statutes forever to the end. And it's such a strong statement. I think a few things that, you know, that I think assumptions that I make are, okay, if I'm reading this, then on some level, this person is adding value to my life, or is expected to add value to my life. So it's why it's in Scripture. You know, so if it's in Scripture and it's supposed to add value to my life, then these types of statements then can really be statements that I can use to challenge me, right? And so if the author says that they incline their heart to perform his statutes, then I can look at that, and unless I get that it's specifically written to somebody for a reason, I can look at it like we talked about with Hosea and go, hey, this is for me. So, you know, there's something to be said about me inclining my heart to perform his statutes, and then this idea of forever to the end. What are those things? So my heart is the thing that I want to, the language of heart is what I want to use when I'm talking about relationships. I'm talking about love. I'm talking about like doing life together. I'm talking about things that come from this position of my heart. And, you know, breaking that word down, it's really it's used 78 times in that exact same kind of context in the Old Testament, and it's interchangeable with the words myself and mind. So heart, myself, and mind are this interchangeable thought. And so it helps us understand that we're not talking about like this this organ, you know what I'm saying, in my body is the thing that I incline who I am. Like, and probably talking about more about identity, right? You know, you and I were talking about this last night about identity, and why don't you share a little bit about that, like the idea of like, you know, even that we ourselves sometimes only know our shadow, you know?
Yeah, there's so most of us, we have depends on, I'm not sure of the origins of like the idea necessarily, but Thomas Merton, he wrote it's like No Man is an Island, and he's got a number of works. He was Catholic, I believe, if I remember correctly.
That's what you told me, I
monk.
think,
Yeah, and he taught a lot about like your ego versus reality, or he talked a lot about the like the new man or the true self versus the false self. A lot of this language addressing sort of the duality within us. And he spoke of, I have a book of his where he speaks of masks, where we all put one on, and it's basically, and it's simply just the presentation that I'm giving to everyone. So there's a Dylan that everybody sees that I'm putting on, and we all, whether we like it or not, like some of our masks are closer to who we truly are than others, but a lot of times we're putting on these masks, and there are a number of us out there who may not even be acquainted with our true self, and we think that our mask is actually what we look like.
Right.
Or we think that the shadow self, this thing that is not us, but is it's only produced by the light of the sun.
Mm-hmm.
It's thinking that this thing that we present to people is ourself is the same thing as thinking that our shadow is us.
Mm-hmm.
But some people do that. We think that all the things that I hide, or all of these things that I don't let anyone see, like this put together me, which we really face in social media. I mean, social media, the age of that is really just people's highlight reel. I mean, you only ever see, people do share not nice things, but even when you do, it's still like a nice picture. Sure. Like if somebody passes away, it's a good photo of their grandparent or their spouse or whoever. It's not a photo from the funeral usually. Like, it's not something that's depressing. It's even still this like approachable or palatable sort of thing. But anyway,
it's not something that would let us know that you're grieving, or something that would let us know the emotions you're feeling. It's something that conveys just the baseline joy, happiness, hope. Like,
and we have this again. So we have these masks, and a lot of us think that that's actually what our face looks like, and we need to take that thing off, because ultimately, God sees and knows your heart.
Right.
That inner man, that inner being of you, with warts and all,
right,
is how he says it. And that's the person that God desires, loves, and knows. But again, so I mean, I say it around Halloween all the time. People get upset about people wearing masks once a year, and I'm worried about the ones who wear them every other day.
Yeah. Well, so how then that kind of births this question, when, especially inside of a relationship, and so many relationships end up going south because of this very thing. We'll see divorce and unfaithfulness because of these masks, and how can somebody, or I guess it's really not a question, it's more of a statement, but that is, you're not going to be able to incline your heart to the place where you're able to perform the statutes or the expectations of God if you don't know who you are, because then what are you inclining? Are you inclining? Are you turning? And that word incline, I even broke that down, and it's this idea of to turn or to stretch out. And so it's like how can I take who I am if I don't even know who I am, what my capacities are, what I'm capable of, because it's all covered up with masks and if I don't know what's in there, what I'm turning is actually just more of who I'm not. Yeah. And the writer here, I think, is getting really transparent. It's just saying, I'm going to take who I am, and I'm going to start obeying the statutes of God. Because one of the things that becomes a struggle, especially for people who are new believers or people who come out of some really terrible situations, like i.e., and I think that this is not the case for Quinn. I would say, thankfully, Quinn's been surrounded by a lot of good people, maybe even uniquely compared to others. But a lot of people who come out of addiction or out of some type of criminal past, they can feel like, well, I'm not good enough, I'm not deserving. This becomes a natural kind of thing, and that's because they're coming to grips with who they really are, coming out of some of their pasts. And the writer is sitting here going like, I'm going to take what I've got. I'm saying, I'm not sitting here and telling you it's the superstar material. I don't even want to tell you that it's the worst of the worst. I'm just taking what I've got, who I am, and I'm turning it and saying, this person with all their warts and failures is going to do the best they can to obey you today. And the idea of obedience is not about like fulfilling some legalistic responsibility. We talked a little bit about this kind of in the past weeks, but it is really about being able to walk in relationship with God. God says, hey, you want to walk in a relationship with me? Here's how you do it. It would be similar to me going like, it'd be similar like for me and Carmen, like we want to walk in relationship. What does that look like? Well, that looks like faithfulness. When it comes to our emotions and our physical intimacy being given out. It looks like showing up. It looks like answering my phone. It looks like taking time for conversations. It looks like meals together. It looks like watching a show together, playing a game together. It looks like taking the time to invest in the children together, share homework responsibilities, scrubbing toilets, mending the fence, giving the other one a break. And all of those things could come down. You could go, man, this is getting to sound pretty legalistic. Like you're telling me that if I'm going to be in a healthy relationship with you, that I'm going to have to clean the toilet sometimes. Yeah, that's what I'm telling you. I'm telling you that the toilet isn't going to clean itself, and sometimes you've got to go clean the toilet, and that's just part of it, right? And then it's going to get even more complicated, because there's going to be a day where one of you is sick, and you're going to end up having to clean up things you don't even want to be talking about, And then if you stay in a relationship long enough, it's going to get even messier, and you're going to be a part of it. So from the outside, we can get very vain and go, well, my mask looks really, really good, and I'm not going to be a part of that. But if we really want to be honest and we just start turning ourselves towards God, we have to go, I'm going to step into some of these areas I may not agree with. But
and what happens a lot too, and I think is important, is like the mistakes that we make are not who we are. Correct. Like I think our actions ultimately, the actions that we make become our habits, and ultimately our habits solidify into our character.
Sure.
Like we can't deny that. If you make a habit of a thing, But
the good news is we can change that habit.
But what also is really important, I think, talking about these masks, if we'll just learn, again, I think what's really important is, again, like when we take the mask off and look at ourselves, we could actually learn and discover that we're beloved by God, and that God receives us without the mask. And with that, I really hope that just that idea alone can encourage somebody to take theirs off and actually be that and embrace that identity, and allow that to be, once they see that clearly, they can actually begin to be that in their relationships. Because like you said, you were talking about what ends up happening in these is eventually, once you've sort of gotten in so far, you start to loosen up on the front end of a relationship. You're minding P's and Q's. You're making it's like grabbing the door, getting a car door, buying flowers, doing all the stuff. It's the whole 9 yards. I mean, you're just... no body noises.
That's right.
And then eventually, that just eventually start to loosen up, and it's like, and eventually the mask, for a lot of people, the mask comes off, and or the way that you actually speak to people begins to show, or like what you really think begins to come out, and all of a sudden it's, again, we've been hiding these things, and then when they come to light, we actually haven't been our true selves, and that can cause a lot of pain,
No doubt.
because I mean, whether you know it or not, or whether we know it or not, like, people want to know other people, and
for us as Christians, what's really important is that if we understand that, we need to be that. So it's important. Like, I don't just need to be real and authentic for my wife. I need to be capable of being real and authentic, even for people I don't know very well yet, so that they have an opportunity to experience that.
And that's not like throwing out and airing all your dirty laundry to a stranger.
No, not at all.
Like, nothing like that. But it's this, like, I'm not going to wear the mask. I'm not going to be someone I'm not.
Correct.
Like, for that reason, because to show people that, like, I've accepted myself because I'm accepted by God.
Right.
And with that, we should be able to, if God has accepted me without mine, we should be able to accept and receive people without their mask. So.
And he goes on, he says, I hate the double-minded, but I love your law. And this is why I really chose these verses, is because he moves from this idea of inclining his heart to perform the statutes of God to the end, meaning continuously, forever. And how is that happening? The next two verses, I think, really kind of dive into that. And he says, I hate the double-minded, but I love your law. And that Dylan just kind of stirred me a lot, because I live with a lot of emotion that I feel like comes from outside influence on how, like, well, you shouldn't hate, and you shouldn't hate anything or anybody, and hate doesn't have a place. And I read this, and I don't necessarily want to get into like political games and terminology and maybe what somebody means by a statement, but I really got to thinking about how much stuff that I love. So therefore, there are other things that I really do hate, things that I just am like, I want these things gone. I don't want them in my life, and I don't want them in my neighbor's life. Not just my neighbor because they live next to me, but my neighbor because I care about them, And I made a list of some of these, and, some of the things that I love, some of the things that I hate, and it wasn't really actually very difficult for me. I could say with a lot of confidence that I hate racism.
Right.
I hate it. Even if I have areas in my life that express some form of racism, that are unbeknownst to me, it doesn't change the fact that I hate it. Right. I don't want it. I don't want anything to do with it. I do not believe in an ideology that says a skin color of one person is better than the skin color of another person. It is fundamentally incorrect. There's
it goes against, when you get down to even the way that we're made, not just in a like, psychologically or this, that, and the other, but like, basically like, kind is attracted to kind. Mm-hmm. So even on like a molecular level and an atomic level, these things have come together, and we're made up of all these things, and these people are made of the exact same thing. And somehow we're choosing to reject a thing that is exactly created in the same way that we are. Like, even down to like that, like you are rejecting your own, like you're rejecting yourself. Right. When you do that, like, and even to do that is to, we talked a lot about, or have spoken about the image of God, and it's to denounce the image of God on another person.
Right.
To say that the fingerprint of God is not on them for something so arbitrary is, it is detestable.
And so I think that it's really interesting that he chose the view here that of all the things he could have written out, of what he hated, he wrote, I hate the double-minded. And for me, it just kind of feels like, like I love your law, and it's like I'm making this absolute, and I'm not going to make exclusions. And so he probably is living life around a lot of people who make exclusions, like, I love your law, but, or, I love aspects of the teachings, but, and he says, I hate the double-minded, and so we could have had this infinite list. Like I sat here and thought, man, there's a number of things, but this one really does a good job at summarizing it, because especially if we're talking among brothers, sisters, and that is that, we can get divided really, really quick and still be clinging on to portions of how we interpret Scripture, or who we claim God is, or, even how we define love in there. So, and I think that it's important too, like if I don't hate some of the places I've been, I'll go back to those places. It's not until they're detestable to me that I really find freedom. And I'm just talking about, like I use the illustration of the children of Israel in Egypt. You know what I'm saying? It's like if I don't hate Egypt, then I'll long for Egypt. And but Egypt was my place of slavery and captivity, not my place of freedom, not my purpose, my destiny. And so for me, and I've shared very openly, my testimony of having had an addiction to pornography and finding freedom from that. I hate that. I hate pornography. I hate what it does to people. When people sit here and give me all of their reasons for why it's good and healthy, like all that it does is reaffirm that it's a terrible thing. It is destructive. There are people who are being hurt by it. There are, we're going beyond the industry within itself. We're talking about kids that are in homes, unfaithfulness within marriages. We're talking about mindsets that are being like spilling over into the way that we raise our families, the way we interact at work. I mean, these things, I hate it. I don't want anything to do with it. I don't ever want to go back there. You know what I'm saying? Right. And so that's kind of the idea. And then we move into the next verse, and it says, you are my hiding place and my shield. I hope in your word. And I think that the idea of a hiding place is just a really good picture. You were talking in our men's group a couple of weeks ago about worship, and it's like, sometimes we sing the song not because we're feeling the feeling, but because we know, it's the right place to be in the right moment, and the hiding place doesn't always feel like a safe place, but it's still the hiding place.
Well, that would be by nature, at least in regards to David, that's what it is. Like, it's not the hiding place. It is a safe place, but it's because he is not in one. Correct. It's like there are people who are pursuing me.
It doesn't remove the fear.
Yeah, and it's but it's like I need to go, like I need to be hidden. It is so for us, we play hide and seek. So when we think of a hiding place, we think of a game. But again, like in the context of this, it's like people, he says it in all the Psalms all the time, like people desire, like for my head, people like my adversaries surround me, and then for him to say, but like you are my hiding place, like you're my refuge, like my strong tower, like this. It's a completely different context than, especially like for me for a long time. That's just how I thought about it. But learning, the more that we learn about David's life, a hiding place is, again, like it's safe, but it's because it's like you need it because you are surrounded, or like there are people who are pursuing you who don't wish you well. And yeah, when we were talking about that, it's, I say this and people don't always care for it, but there's some merit, at least to me, as I've like looked into more like liturgical services. Most of my life I've been in not like traditional or liturgical services, like a Catholic service or Anglican service, things like that. But what they ended up teaching me is they get me acquainted, because I don't know what to do in those. So like I'm acquainted with my own like lack of ability to like conjure up the Spirit of God. Like I just have to hope that God and pray that God like meets me in that moment, and He always does. But there's some merit I learned with it. They when they recite these prayers and do things, is I asked someone why they did it, and they said it's like water on a rock, because eventually like it causes the thing to break. But what it does, same thing with Hebrew prayers, is it teaches you how to pray when you don't know how to. In that moment, like when you don't know what to pray, it's already in there. And all that to say, there's some merit to going through the motions, in that it's saying like, my body doesn't want to do this thing, but I'm going to make it submit to God anyway. Right. Like it's and I think that there's something about that when we have that mindset. Obviously, going through them, doing it without consciously being aware is like, but when we make ourselves submit, and when we were talking about obedience, like even when we don't feel like it, that going through the motions, it feels that like when we do that, there is some merit to it, because something is happening in the supernatural that we don't always understand.
Well, and sometimes it's preparation, you're kind of alluding to here, and it's this idea that's like, a couple of months ago, you guys had me play Apex Legends, right?
Oh, yeah.
And you come in, you get dropped in. It's a place I've never seen before. People are shooting at me. I'm running around. I've never been on these maps, and I have no idea where I'm going, what I'm doing, but there are people that I'm playing who they've been playing these maps now for months at this point. They know exactly where they're going. They know exactly what buildings are open and closed, and where the hiding places are. And so like, I'm just trucking down the street, unbeknownst to me, there's a hiding place right here, and the person jumps out and shoots me in the face, and it's like, what just happened? Am I right?
Yeah. I mean, it's, yeah.
And I have no idea. And so the good thing about the Word of God, and he even kind of segues into that, hope in your word, is that it's like I always need your word. I always need you to protect me, right? But sometimes I need you to protect me. And if I'm just dropping in for the first time, like, hey, we haven't been jiving lately, and I haven't been around, but all of a sudden I'm in need, I'm going to be spending more time trying to figure out what I'm doing than I am actually being protected. And so like, sometimes we're going through some of those motions as the scripture teaches us to do, so that in the moment of distress, in the moment of need, we're able to go, boom, I know exactly what to do. And we get this anywhere else in the world, right? I mean, our military gets it. They don't just go, hey, listen, we're going to assign everybody a weapon, and when it's combat time, you'll use it. No, they're going to walk them through scenario after scenario after scenario. You're going to fire this weapon. You're going to reload this weapon. You're going to break this weapon down. You're going to put it back together. You're going to run in the dark. You're going to run in 100 degrees. You're going to run with a person on your back. All of the things we're going to do as if we're preparing you for a moment when you might actually need these things. And we do the same thing with our medical training, right? Student goes through, and what do? They are going to work on dead animals, and they're going to work on, people who have donated their bodies to be worked on. They're going to do tests, and then they're going to work hand in hand, side by side with other doctors. And before they get to the place where all of a sudden somebody comes in, their heart has stopped, and they are relying on somebody to save them right now. You know what I'm saying? Before that happens, they will have had a lot of training, so that in the moment they go, oh, I've been in this place. I can do this thing. And so we get this. We get this in every area of life, all the way down to the barista at the coffee shop,
It's almost, it's a discipline.
Yeah.
That they, and not in like a discipline as in like you're trying to like
punish somebody.
Yeah. Or
correct them.
Yeah. But a discipline as
a behavior.
And we do get that. I mean, we understand that with being like Christians, there are like spiritual disciplines. Those are the things that, so like anyone who's like, oh, like I'm not religious, like you probably are, because by definition, like basically if you read scriptures, if you pray, there are a number of there's like 7 that like if you do those, like you are a religious person, but they're just spiritual disciplines. And in the same way, there are like relational disciplines that we like. If we want not only like a good spiritual life, like we have these things, but like if you want a good relational life, there are like disciplines and things that you need to put in place and learn how to do. And again, that can sound, like you said earlier, like that can sound legalistic, but it's not. We're not condemning you. It's just the fact of the matter.
So he says, I incline my heart to your statutes, and I do this. How? I do this because he says, verse 113, because I love your law. And then verse 114, because I hope in your word, right? Your instruction is what's best for me. And so I'm going to stretch and I'm going to lean in and I want to understand your teaching, and I want to be in sync with it, because in the end, you're the thing that helps me prevent me from being double-minded, being destructive, being destroyed even in myself, and ultimately you become my protection, because there will be a day where I just need to be able to sit down and be protected. I need somebody to pull the shield up because my arms are going to be weary, and you'll be the one that's my shield. So it's kind of the idea. And this coming week, we'll be wrapping this series up, and I'm kind of excited for what I feel like just God's been showing me for the conclusion.
Cool.
So we'll be doing this again next week.
Yep.
To wrap it up.
Again, so as always, before you go, thanks for checking us out. If you heard something or if you learned something, please like, comment, and again, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell to stay up to date. So thank you, Jim, for your time. And that's everything, everybody. We'll see you next week. We love you. Go change your world.